Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Chords Records. My name's Katie. I've been thinking a lot about Parsons and Emmylou Harris, and it's because I recently acquired the most incredible album, the International Submarine Band, and I just thought I might go through the journey of the two of them through kind of like a musical journey. So I'm going to go through maybe a dozen albums, where they've come from, how they connected, and the follow on. So I hope you enjoy this. So we start with, as I said, the International Submarine Band. So who is Gram Parsons? Gram Parsons was an incredible country rock musician. Started off a bit folk. He was born in 1946, and he originally went to Harvard and he was studying theology, and then he got into the music scene. I won't go too much into the history because this is about the music, but around about 1965 he formed the International Submarine Band. I recently acquired this album and it's got a very interesting history. So this particular issue I have is it looks like a white label promo. But it's actually a bootleg of a white label promo, because the actual label itself never did white label promos. And so this bootleg came out of it. So I picked this up recently at a record fair where there were some amazing pickups for me, which I will go into at some point. But this one for me is priceless, being able to get a copy, even if it's a bootleg, of this International Submarine Band. So Gram Parsons formed this band, and it's kind of an indication of his future. He was really starting to think about how folk music crosses over with country. And so this band was formed in 1965. It wasn't released until 1968. He kind of gave up university, and then he eventually left them and joined the Byrds, the very, very famous band, who were already onto their they were several albums deep, and they wanted to go in a new direction. This was the country album where Gram Parsons was welcomed into the band, and this is Sweetheart of the Rodeo. There were a few legalities, and it ended up that a lot of his vocals were taken off this, but he was still on a few songs. This is one of my favorite albums in fact, it is my favorite album of the Byrds. And this was recorded in 1968. Not long after this album came out, he was subsequently fired from the Byrds, and he then joined the Flying Burrito Brothers. I don't have an original Flying Burrito Brothers, and it's something I would love. I've just never come across one in the wild, and I like to buy them in the wild as opposed to just jump online and buy one. But I did find this one, which is kind of a compilation of a lot of their music that came out the year he died, and I think it was almost a tribute to him, and it includes many songs from the Flying Burritos Brothers catalogue, including several Gram Parsons albums. And they released this album really trying to capitalize on the fact that he'd been in the band. But he was in the Flying Burrito Brothers from 1969-1970, when he eventually left or was fired. By this stage, he's getting into quite a bit of drug addiction, and he embarks on wanting to pursue a solo career. So that's kind of Gram Parsons' early work in the bands he was in. So he started the International Submarine Band in the mid 60s, 65, recorded that first album. Then he joined the Byrds briefly, and then he joined the Flying Burritos Brothers briefly. A little bit of a tangent, he also recorded with Fred Neil, the incredible New York folk singer, on his album Other Side of Life. And he recorded this in 1971. And the song on here that he recorded was You Don't Miss Your Water, which he's credited as Graham Parsons on piano and vocal. And Graham Parsons had already recorded this once before when he was with the Byrds. And Fred Neil brought him back into the studio and they recorded it together. And it's such a great song. So this is another album I picked up from that record fair I was talking about. So he's left the Flying Burrito Brothers, 1971. He spends a lot of time with Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones, I think about 6 months. He marries someone. He's addicted to heavy drugs and he's not in great shape, but he's wanting to do his first solo album. And around about this time, the Flying Burrito Brothers saw Emmylou Harris at a gig in Washington, D.C. in 1971. And they were all mesmerized by her. They considered hiring her for themselves. And they went, no, we'll introduce her to Graham, because they knew that he wanted a female voice on his album. And the rest is history. So what happened was Graham Parsons invited Emmylou Harris into his band and to record onto his album. And Graham Parsons in late 1972, went on to record the only album that was released in his lifetime, GP, his initials, where Emmylou sings on nearly every song. And so they went into the recording studio and they became musical partners in a way. At this point, they weren't romantically involved, but they were almost like a beautiful musical partnership, almost muses to each other. And their combination of voices together is exquisite. It's just beautiful. So they were touring together. They were singing on stage together, and they'd gone in. This was around 1973. Both of them were around about 24, 25 years old. Graham Parsons was 26-year-old. And they recorded another album which didn't come out until after he died. So Graham Parsons tragically died of drug overdose when he was 26 years old in 1973. And Emmylou Harris is on the record as saying, and in interviews and in a documentary, that she had by this stage fallen in love with him, and she was ready to tell him, but she was going to wait for a few weeks so she could tell him in person. And unfortunately, he passed away. Can you imagine the grief of someone that they had found their musical kind of other half? She'd obviously fallen in love with him, and no doubt he had feelings for her, and it was just taken away from Emmylou Harris, and the grief must have been extraordinary. So not long after, a few months after he passed away, they did release that second album, Grievous Angel, which is beautiful, and it's obviously a masterpiece, and it should be in everyone's collection. I have two versions. I've got this VMP version, which is a great release, but it's nothing on the fantastic Rhino high fidelity that came out earlier this year, along with Luxury Liner by Emmylou Harris, which I'll talk about in a minute. They were kind of like this duo album set that came out. This is such a beautiful recording and mastering of this stunning album. And the Rhino Hi-Fi series in general is just amazing. So that was the final album of Graham Parsons, released not long after he died. So Emmylou Harris they're pretty much Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris albums, really, when you look at them. She's on nearly every vocal. And after he dies, she obviously is very grief-stricken, but within a year, she's in the studio recording with his band. And who he had brought in for his band on both these albums was Elvis Presley's backing band on both these albums. And she thought one way to bring him through on the journey with her and what he'd left behind was to use his band and everything he'd taught her. She kind of made a promise to herself that she was going to honor his memory and move through life with everything she'd learned and been inspired by him. And so for the first two albums that she released in 1975, one in the beginning of the year and one at the end of the year, she used those same musicians from Elvis Presley's band. And those two albums are phenomenal and heartbreaking, knowing the story. The very first one, which is considered really her debut album, although she had released one in 1970, 71, which people kind of just write off a bit, but really they consider this one the debut, Pieces of the Sky, which was really written as a grief album for the loss of her musical partner. This album has a song that she wrote specifically about Graham Parsons passing called Boulder to Birmingham, which is one of the most beautiful songs, and stream it if you can. It's just a heartbreaking song. So that was the first, let's call it grief album for want of a kind of a better word. And then the second album in 1975, while she's still in her full grieving, was a beautiful album, which I've talked about recently, called Elite Hotel. And in my mind, this potentially is the better album. So Elite Hotel came out in around about November 1975 as well. And unlike Pieces of the Sky, she covers 3 Graham Parsons songs on this. So I imagine it was probably too soon after his death to cover anything of his in the Pieces of the Sky. But by this time, she's obviously ready, and she covers Sin City, Ooh, Las Vegas, and Wheels. Sin City and Wheels are from the Flying Burrito Brothers album, The Gilded Palace of Sin. And Ooh, Las Vegas was a song he had on Grievous Angel. And she does these beautiful, beautiful covers of them. And it's they're really haunting. And when you play them side by side, you can see how much she learned from him. But also, you don't know what the future could have held, but I think he could have learned some things from her, because she really builds on these songs. So that's in 1975. So Graham Parsons died in 1973. Emmylou Harris is grieving and brings out these 2 albums in 1975, her first and second album. And then in 1976, her third album. This is the album I was talking about before that was released this year, last year, by the Rhino High Fidelity, Luxury Liner. And of course, Luxury Liner is the title song of the album, was written by Graham Parsons. So this is her third album. So she's really leaning in to continuing Graham's music legacy. And Luxury Liner is a song that Graham Parsons recorded with the International Submarine Band all those years ago. It's just such a beautiful musical collaboration and journey that these two have embarked on, his short life and her entire life. So this beautiful album, I won't take it out of the sleeve, but again, another great gatefold from Rhino, and it's got a beautiful essay by the guitarist on it. And if you get any of the Rhino hi-fis from 2024, those two, in my mind, are the two to get. And so we're now at that was released in 1976, and then in 1979, by this stage she'd released a few more albums, and so then she comes out with her 6th album, Blue Kentucky Girl. And on this album, she continues the tradition that she had started from her first albums of covering another Graham Parsons song. And this one is Hickory Winds, which was first recorded by the Byrds and Graham singing on the Sweetheart of the Rodeo album. And then he covered it on Grievous Angel, and she covers it on this album. And so the journey is continuing. And when you realize these beautiful narratives and stories in music, it just makes the listening so much better, don't you think? It's just marvelous. It's amazing. And then obviously she's moving on. She's getting married again. Her life is evolving, and she records a few more albums, and then her 8th album, Evangeline, comes out in 1981. And on this album, she chooses to record a Graham Parsons track, Hot Burrito 2, which of course was on the Flying Burrito Brothers, and they had written Hot Burrito 1 and Hot Burrito 2, and she records Hot Burrito 2 on this album. So she then starts kind of evolving her music. She's you can tell she's experimenting with different kind of forms of music, and there's a bit of a gap. She does release a live album not long after Evangeline. So she releases a live album called Last Date. And interestingly enough, on this, and this is just 1 year after it, in 1982, and there she is in her live glory. And on this album, she does the most beautiful live cover version of Return of the Grievous Angel from that same Grievous Angel album. But she also covers Devils in Disguise, which is a Flying Burritos song. So throughout her career, she's just ensuring that Graham's legacy and Graham and her legacy, because really these were songs that they sang together and they were part of her musical history. So that's it. This is a really beautiful live album of Emmylou Harris. It's not the greatest cover in the world, but if you can pick it up, it's a really good one. And then so that album is the last physical album that I have. I collect all these in the wild. I don't buy anything from Discogs. I'm a completist with her, and I've got quite a few to get. I mean, I have a lot of Emmylou, but there are a few I'm missing, and some of them are the later ones. And I just want to talk about 2 more, which are really a huge part of this musical collaboration story. The first one is The Ballad of Sally Rose, written in 1985 by Emmylou Harris and her then husband. And this could be considered a concept album, and it's a concept album based loosely on her and Graham Parsons' relationship. It's about a young artist who meets a musician who gets killed in a car crash. And I think that's really important to say, because she's clearly, even as late as 1985, which is 12 years after Graham has died, she's still remembering him and thinking about him and writing about him. And in fact, the last song on this album is called Sweetheart of the Rodeo. And then finally, the last album I want to refer to is Hard Bargain. This was an album released in 2011, so almost 30 years after his passing. And the first song on this album is called The Road, and it's never been released on vinyl to my knowledge, so it's hopefully it will be. And this song, The Road, she talked about in a really beautiful interview in Rolling Stone magazine, how Graham Parsons was someone who had really obviously impacted her life, and she said it was kind of a tip of the hat to someone who had set her on her trajectory of her career, and she wrote this song called The Road about him, and it was really the first song that she'd written about him since that time ago when she wrote Boulder to Birmingham in 1975. And so she was returning to it. And in a, up until now, that's the final album. She's now 77. She was born in 1947. She hasn't released another full original album. So the last one was that album in 2011. So she may never release another album. That's, 13, 14 years ago. And I just think it's lovely that the very first track on that final album that she recorded was a song about her musical collaborator and muse. So that's my rundown of Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris's musical crossover, and the kind of a very brief history of the two of them from a musical kind of scenario. And I hope you've learned something here, and that it inspires you to go listen to their music, stream it, buy it. I'm obviously a vinyl lover, so it's always fun for me to buy the vinyl. Anyway, please subscribe to my channel, and please like this video and comment below your favorite albums, tracks of both the artists, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.